All right, Nikki, take it away.
Okay.
If you lose me again, I'll be back.
Okay, my dear. Thank you. So yes, I'm so happy to be here. And I think what we're going to do today is really take a deep dive in the secrets of award-winning podcasts. And I'm excited to reveal, your deepest, darkest secrets, you guys. That's what you're here
Can't
for.
wait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're also going to
Yeah.
discover like the secrets behind success, which I know is sometimes hard to pinpoint, but I want to dig in and find that out. I also want to talk just about what your process is. And so if you're watching and you're a seasoned podcaster or you're just getting started, I feel like today's little webinar is going to be full of invaluable insights and inspiration, I hope. So let's get started. We have two amazing humans here today. I've been lucky enough to see both of them win Ambie Awards in my presence. So we have Gilbert King from Bone Valley, 2023 Best Documentary and Best Reporting. I was on the sidelines when you won. I was screaming for you. I don't know if you heard me.
Oh, thank you. Probably did, yeah.
Gilbert is also, on his downtime, a Pulitzer Prize winning author turned podcaster about murder and injustice. And like a lot of your work, this is a wrongful conviction story, which just tugs at my heart. And so thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure to be here. Could be fun.
Yeah. And Payne Lindsey, I just adore you. I feel like we live these worlds where I'm always hearing your name and I'm always talking about you, but I never get to like hang out
Where
with you.
is this guy? Yeah.
You have many, many successful podcasts, but today we're actually going to be chatting about Up and Vanished, the trial of Ryan Duke, which was 2023's best true crime podcast. Congrats. Um, and I think what I'm excited to talk to you about is shedding the light on important stories that need to be told. And your podcast really helped change the course of the case and in a way helped solve it. And I want to dig into that more. So thank you for being here today.
Of course.
So let's get into the questions. So let's start with you, Payne, with Up and Vanished. I know that your podcast in a way reignited this public interest about this case, the trial of Ryan Duke. I want to know, when you initially started the process in this podcast, did you know that this was going to be the case that it ended up being? Like, did you have an instinct about that? And how did you choose to tell that story?
I mean, I really wanted what happened to happen. Like I didn't rule it out per se, but I had no clue what kind of influence a podcast could have on a real life case, especially in 2016 when I first started. And Serial was the bar, so it was kind of a big leap. But yeah, I had no clue where it would go. But I hoped that it would do something at, and that's why I did it in the first place.
Yeah. Well, dream come true. Pretty amazing. Gilbert, what about you? Like, did you, what made you decide to sort of pick up the mic versus picking up the pen or the computer this time? Like, what inspired you to choose the story?
Yeah, it's really a good question, because when I first started this story, I was sort of in between books, and this story came to me, and I said, all right, maybe I could write a feature story about this, maybe for something like the Marshall Project or ProPublica, and just focus on this wrongful conviction. But I wasn't really expecting to spend a lot of time on it. But when I started it, I realized that, different from my books, everybody was still alive. And so I was making phone calls. People were willing to talk to me. And it just got really dynamic. Like, we were actually talking to people who were involved in the case, which is not usually something I can do because the cases are so long ago. And I think it was actually, my producer, Kelsey, who was actually my researcher at the very time. She was listening to a lot more podcasts and I wasn't. It was her idea. She said, we have these stories and these really good storytellers. Maybe we should do a podcast. And so I didn't know what I was doing. We had to learn all that, but she had a really good point. And then, that's actually what we ended up doing, pivoting to a podcast. So we had to learn how to audio record and everything, but it was great. And I love the experience so much. I want to do more.
It's amazing. It's funny, Payne,
Yeah.
because when we spend so much of our time, right, making audio and creating audio, and then Gilbert, I love that when you got up on stage and you won your Ambie, you were like, well, I didn't really know how to use a microphone when I first started. And I was like, best stories. And I'm like, yes, these are the ones I love, because sometimes when you do it day in and day out, it becomes just kind of part of what you do. You just don't really think about it. And there's such a sacredness. And I think getting people to talk to you via audio and really it's a different kind of intimacy, I think, than television or books. And so I was so excited when you said that in your speech, like that you weren't afraid and you weren't afraid to take the risk to just go for it. That's awesome.
Well, I'll be honest, I learned a lot from the way you guys work and the way you conduct your interviews by, having to be quiet and having to listen and nod instead of talking. I mean, my first interviews, I'm like, yeah, right. That's right. It ruined all the tape. So I had to learn, but actually by slowing it down and just listening and nodding, it made me think more, and it made the dead space become more valuable. So I learned a lot from the way podcasters interview people. It was really helpful to me.
Right. That's really cool. Payne, what about, you do this so often and you find yourself enmeshed in these really deep stories, right, in people's lives. And walk us through like your process of how you introduce yourself to these people, how you get into their lives and get them to trust you to sort of open up old wounds sometimes. Like, like, I want to know about your research, and I want to know how you gather and you verify this. And I'm going to steal all of your ideas
Right.
for the next podcast.
You can steal all of them. Well, it's funny because it's changed a bit. If you go back to 2016, my first podcast, Up and Vanished season 1, I was just this random kid coming into a small town as a podcaster, making a true crime podcast, and that was really kind of a foreign concept to a lot of people at that time, especially in this small Georgia town. And so, a lot of ways, they were kind of more comfortable talking to me instead of police because it just felt like there was not going to be any consequences. And I was just being friendly. And if, if I was being vulnerable with them, they would be vulnerable with me. So I always kind of value that if I'm wanting to get into some sort of intimate, sensitive conversation with somebody, that I offer that I'm sort of willing to go there too. And I think that's just a fair way to do it. And then through the years, after making several shows, I would end up sometimes meeting people who've listened to one of my podcasts. And so my approach could no longer be just the amateur guy who doesn't know what he's doing. I have to at least pretend like I know what I'm doing now. Yeah, I think it's just like anything else, just being friendly. And people want the truth innately, and they want good things to happen. And I think if you just lean into that part of it and show that you don't have any sort of ulterior motive, and just be willing to kind of expose yourself, then people will talk to you more than you would be surprised about. Like you were saying, Gilbert, sort of the dead space is a smart thing to do. And I kind of learned it on accident. Like early on, I would be interviewing someone and I would kind of just blank on my next question. I'd be like, oh shit. And I would just sit there, and then they would start talking again. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I kind of learned that, that uncomfortable silence sometimes creates like a new thought. Somebody wants to fill the air with something. And I also realized that, hey, they're probably more nervous than me, like right now. And because I'm nervous. And so I kind of just remain conscious of that and try to, make this a comfortable environment, and even acknowledge that, hey, might be weird for me too. And I think that human connection helps you get better tape and get like really good stories because people are being open and truthful with you.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good point. Alicia Doyle in the Q&A brought up a question that actually is my next question. So thank
Nice.
There you go.
I do want to know, like, in terms of the journalistic standards, which Alicia wants to know as well, like, what practices and what standards do you use when attempting to confirm elements of a story, like gathering, verifying, like, where do you fall in line with that, Gilbert?
I just feel like I've always, most of these projects I do for my books, they take about 5 years to do. And so, obviously you don't have 5 years to do a podcast.
Usually
Just-
not.
Sometimes it
Yeah.
can be that long, right?
If
Yeah,
someone
right.
would give me 5 years, I'd take it. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be like, but because we were starting out, we didn't really know who was going to be doing it. And then, we were just investigating, trying to draw up a proposal for this idea while we were researching it. And then COVID happened and everything just kind of shut down. So I got like an extra year out of this thing where I was just like at home and we had nothing to really do except do research and try and figure it out. But one of the things I recall is just like the difficulties of just trying to make contact with people by phone and how difficult that is. Most people don't even have landlines anymore. And most people I know don't even pick up their cell phone if a stranger calls.
I'm
And
never
so,
answering it. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's like trying to reach people sometimes. It's like now I find myself shooting messages to older people who have Facebook accounts and trying to reach them there. But some of them don't know how to get those messages if you're not friends. So it's just more difficult. But I realized like knocking on doors and talking to people so they can see your face and just maybe sort of see that you're curious, maybe you know a little something, that you can make that connection. I've gotten shut out so many times on the phone because I didn't have that face-to-face contact. But in terms of journalism, these are the things I had to learn, because again, I'm usually dealing with dead people and documents. So I'm never actually trying to reach anybody alive. And so a lot of it was just trying to, start from scratch and say, how do I do this? And sincerity turns out to be the number one thing you could possibly do.
Right. Right. Payne, did you have any more thoughts on that? Just curious if you wanted to share.
What was the original question that, because he answered it so well, I feel like I don't even know what
I know, like just gathering and verifying your information and like the line of like journalistic practices and how you verify.
Yeah.
What's the line?
I mean, I get asked that, I feel like a lot because I started this whole thing saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't be doing this, which is like a trope now. But it's to me, if it's like an investigation, you know, uh, you're trying to figure that out. You're trying to figure out what is true. And so if you're talking about sources, you usually want to have more than one of those, I would assume, right? And I've like looked up journalistic practices and stuff, and I've asked people recently, I'm like, what is a journalist, right? I've asked like really big journalists what they think a journalist is, and I think that can mean more than one thing now. When I think of a journalist, I think of somebody like Gilbert, somebody who is a writer or someone who works for some, as a reporter, something that like I look up to. But I'm doing the same thing, maybe just more in a guerrilla style, on the ground way. Um, and so, I mean, I lean into my own sort of moral compass, but just being kind of self-aware and double checking things and just not being crazy about it. I think that if you stop and think and you can use critical thinking, that's a extremely important factor in, covering a story and making sure your facts are straight and, getting honest conversations with people. All those things become super important.
Very cool. So when you're spewing the facts and you're giving the information and you're giving the details because you're honoring the story, how do you keep the listeners engaged throughout the series? I know that's a very big question, but like, are there any techniques or tricks in your pocket that you kind of hold on to keep everybody super engaged in what's really going down? Gilbert?
Yeah, I'll just start with that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the thing that, I try and do is a narrative. So I come from the world of like book writing, not narrative nonfiction. And so that's the kind of story I want to tell, where I'm the authoritative narrator. I know that sounds kind of strange, but I think listeners want that. They want to rely on somebody to bring them the story. And, like I know that there's different kinds of styles. Like if you look back at Serial One, like they were still investigating as they go. They were relying on, tips coming in over the phone. And that's not something I can do because I feel like giving me a week to look something like I'm never going to be able to do that. And so I just feel like I can't adapt on the fly like that. So I want to spend a long time on this and make it, make sure that I know where this is going. And I crowdsourcing would not work for me because I just can't adapt that quickly. So I have to really just do this and get it ready when it's ready. And the scripts, we put a lot of time into the writing because we really want to make this narrative tight. Because you can, I mean, Payne, this, you learn so much. You could fill up probably 6 podcasts with the one that you're doing, just need, or stuff that maybe isn't that interesting. Maybe you
Gotta
have a
kill your
speaker who-
darlings, is what they say, right?
Yeah. And it's really true. I mean, I can't tell you how much stuff I've left out just because, you know what? We don't have tape on that. We just have me reading a transcript. It's not interesting. And so sometimes you have to sacrifice really good information to keep your
Yeah.
story moving. And so there's a lot of choices that you have to make along the way. I also think working with a team is really important because there's things that I get hung up on. I spent so long looking into this and I found this fact and I want that in there. And your
Yeah.
other people are like, it's not that interesting.
They're like,
It's
yeah,
a
it's
throwaway
boring.
thing.
Yeah.
And so you're like, all right, you guys are probably right.
You're like, fine. Yeah.
Right.
So what about you, Payne? Do you, do you have techniques or little tricks that you use? I mean, what I noticed
I mean,
from
yeah, sure. Yeah.
I notice when I listen to both of your work, you always bring it back to center, which is not to be too morbid, but who really is affected at the end of the day? Whose family member was taken? Who died in this story? It's something that you both do very beautifully. And I just said, how do you work that in? How do you keep that steady? Because at the end of the day, this is someone's life and death, but also you have to keep the listener, you have to give them just enough. Oh my God, that's my phone. I made fun of people that do this on Zooms right before we started. So sorry.
What's funny is that we couldn't even hear it.
Yeah.
My brother.
That's hilarious.
Oh my gosh, sorry about that. At least it's somebody I like.
Right.
That's true.
It's not the police, is it? Yeah.
It's the police. They want to talk to the two of you.
They're like, they heard him on this Zoom call.
Exactly. What I do love is you always bring it back to center, but at the end of the day, you are telling a story. It is for lack of a better word, a product that you are giving
Yeah.
to the audience to digest. So talk
Yeah.
me through a little bit of that, how it works for you, Payne.
I mean, I think that you said, we always bring it back to the center. I think that the first, one of the first things you got to do is make me care, right? Make the listener care. And that can sound a little harsh or crude if you're talking about a missing person or something. But I mean, you need to make the audience care about this story, right? And so if you can do that, then now they're interested, and then now it's about keeping them interested. When I made Up and Vanished, there wasn't a lot of different blueprints for like how a true crime podcast should sound. And honestly, I wished that there was at the time. I trust me, I looked. And I got a lot of shit for saying one time, like a long time ago, like, I'm not a podcaster, and I offended some people in a room. But there wasn't any sort of serial investigative type shows that came across to me in this sort of cinematic way. And I looked at like Sarah Koenig, like, she's better at this than me. She's a real journalist. She's comes from the broadcast world. I'd had my own identity crisis about, well, what am I thinking that I can do this? So I just simply said, I'm going to make a show that I would want to listen to. And I know that sounds kind of silly, or maybe that's not even helpful. But for me, it's like I have like an ADHD brain, and I think most podcasts are boring, and I still think that. And so I kind of make it with that in mind. And if I'm unpacking complex information, I'm kind of taking it through my filter of how I would understand it. And I almost end up understanding it more as I make it. And so if I do it well enough, the end result can be this digestible thing that has made you care, keeps you caring, and then keeps you wondering or guessing. And then my favorite part, hopefully, leaving you with this cliffhanger at the end and you want to hit next, right? And so I kind of, that's always an evolving thing that I try to get better at and try different ways of doing that. But it starts with knowing where you're going and to me, what's the most clever way of getting there, right? And there's a million ways, but you can't put everything in there, like Gilbert's saying, and you have to learn very early on that some things got to go, and it's all good. They can always come back. It's like people are always afraid to abandon something, but like I look at it like I'm never really abandoning it. I can always come back to it, right? But if you just make some decisions, you might be able to get 5 steps ahead. If you get stuck on this one thing, you could be there forever. Meanwhile, this person over here is finished their podcast because they were able to kind of build on itself. So you got to do a version of both, where you think about the best ways to do it. Some things do require some, let me sleep on it, right? But I like to go with my knee-jerk reaction. If I hear it and it sounds dumb or weird or offensive, if that's my first thought, then that's what it is. I don't sit there and replay it and think, do I really think that? Because if I felt that, someone else is definitely going to feel that. And so my first take, usually on like sonically how this is being perceived, how I sound, delivery, music, that first instinct is probably correct, because why else would I be thinking that? And I don't sit there and try to convince myself otherwise, which I see a lot of creators do sometimes, which I've been victim of, and it's just never productive.
Right.
Mhm.
Gilbert, this one's for you specifically around Bone Valley. When
Sure.
telling the story, which is so layered and so good, what elements do you think are crucial for creating that really compelling story? And I know when you're creating the story, you're not thinking, is this compelling? You're just in it. But when you get it all back and you're putting it together, what elements do you feel are crucial?
Yeah, I think one of the things I had to learn, the hard way, and I'll go back to like during the pandemic when it was just like everything was slowed down. There was nothing to do. It couldn't go anywhere, couldn't travel. So at some point I just started thinking, all right, well, let me just start writing the first episode and just sort of approaching it that way, just getting a sense of it. And I remember just sitting around and trying to write this, and I was treating tape and interviews as like supporting actors in a movie, right? And so that's one thing I had to learn, because I went through and did a whole script based on what I thought the first episode would be. And the bones of it are still very similar to what we ended up with, but it had no life to it. It was so boring. And I realized what had happened was I'd written it, and the tape was just, and then this person said this, and then this person said this, and it was moving it along as if it was a book. That's not how it
Yeah.
works in radio. I had to really respect the tape and the energy of interviews. And so when we had a senior producer come in, Kara Cornhaber, she looked at the script and said, yeah, that's not quite what we have to do here. And just basically started bringing the tape in and saying, you write around the tape. These are the really good ones.
Mhm.
This person's not a very interesting voice. We're going to cut back on some of the storytelling because it's not that interesting. This person's amazing, and pretty priority on the good tape. I had to really learn that. And, I don't think it's a compromise at all. I think it really worked. It was just something I was unfamiliar with. But just
Mhm.
recognizing that, some people are just really dynamic. They have a really interesting voice. You get back and listen to it later, go, wow, this guy or this woman is unbelievable. Let's use that more because she says a lot of things. Maybe we can use that voice to tell more of the story and block out this lawyer or this other person who kind of talks in a monotone and isn't so intriguing. And so you're always making those kind of decisions. They seem kind of surfacey, like, oh, that person's not very interesting. But you have to think that way when you're telling a story through audio.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of answers the question that Bill Taub had, which is how much of the podcast episodes are scripted and how much are, unscripted and just sort of woven together. But it's interesting. I think the goal is to make the episode sound like it's not this scripted thing, that it's just a natural conversation that happens between people. Never is
Yeah.
that the case, right? But I think that really helps that advice is great, and I'm going to hold on to that. Is right around the story. Don't tell the story and then insert the sound later, right? It's like right around your people, and that's really interesting. You know, I want to know if there's a follow-up to Bone Valley. There's an update on the case, and I'm
Sure.
wondering if you plan to incorporate that into the podcast at all coming up?
Yeah, so actually we did. It just came out the other day.
Oh, shoot.
So no, that's fine.
You haven't benched it yet?
Wait, did it really just come out?
Yeah, because our guy, Leo, we were covering the case of Leo Schofield, wrongfully
Yeah.
convicted, spent 36 years in prison. And then finally he got paroled a couple weeks ago. And so he was released. So we spent, Kelsey and I spent the whole day with him. And so that was really interesting. We didn't have any idea of what we wanted it to look like or sound like or anything. We just kind of dove into it and just saw how the day developed. And, you know, what was interesting is like, you know, there was all these wrenches that were thrown into the plans. Like he was supposed to walk out of those prison gates at 9 a.m., family, friends, media, everyone was going to be there. And then the prison got a little nervous about the media because it was like, you know, a high profile inmate, they called him.
They heard
And so they
Gilbert was going to
moved
be
to-
there, and they were like, "Uh-oh."
Yeah, right. Like, what am I going to do? So yeah, they moved it to 6 a.m. It was still dark and raining, and they only let 3 people inside. So we had to adjust to all that. But you know, that's what you got to do, just sort of think on the fly, and it worked out fine. But you know, that was one of the ones where we came back. We didn't have to rush that episode out. We had a couple weeks to sort of work on it, and Kelsey ended up just really coming up with a lot of that on her own. She was the writer of the episode, and you know, I think it turned out really beautifully, and it was just sort of adapting on the fly. We didn't learn what the plans were until the night before when they all changed.
Right. Well, I can't wait to listen. I'm so excited. Payne, with Up and Vanish, the trial of Ryan Duke,
Mhm.
when you dive into this, do you have an awareness of like how to make this particular story set apart from the average true crime podcast? Like, do you go into these true crime podcasts going, how do we make this different? Or do you feel like you have to a little bit honor the formula that is there? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, kind of going back to what Gilbert was saying for a second, which I totally understand, you coming from like a writing background, that would be your natural instinct would be like, okay, this episode is about this, and like, and right, because that makes total sense, and on paper that probably is amazing. I probably couldn't even do that. Um, for me, like in terms of the podcast process, I cut all of my, and this is not how everyone does. I don't even know how everyone does it, but this is how I do it. I make all of these segments, and the people are talking, and they're kind of just these blocks, right? And my goal is for you to be able to press play and listen to that, and I'm not in there at all, and kind of know what happened, kind of pretty much understand to a degree, like that made sense. I could have used a little bit of help from a narrator. So then the very, very last thing I do is my voiceover. And so then I'll write to that, and, you know, where I definitely need it, or maybe I could add or expand here, or maybe I cut a little bit of this tape out and I bring in more of me here, or I remove myself. And so I always just try to find better ways of doing that. I'm just always practicing doing that. I mean, I think there's some like golden rules in storytelling that just kind of make good stories. But I also think that there's, you know, a lot of rules are meant to be broken. I like giving the listener surprises. You know, if I'm, and sometimes they're just happy accidents that happen. I'll be like editing something and have left off here. I'm like, wait, that sounded wild. Like, what if we just ended it right here? And then let's build to that, right? And I kind of push the narrative back that way, like extend it. Kind of just leaning into what actually does sound the best. Also, like what Gilbert was saying, in a much nicer way, is that, you know, sometimes people's voices don't sound good or something, and even down to, you know, some people have Like when they hear like, smacking or something, like people, for some people that's like really bothersome, or that's like a OCD thing. Like I cannot stand that, right? And so you always hope and wish that like your main best source or lead has a great voice, completely out of your control. But there is some level of, balancing it out so the listening experience is comfortable. And that just means that it connected better. That means that if your goal is to solve a murder, that means that they're listening more. This is a better presentation of this story. This has a better shot at making a difference. And so, even though it is a product, you don't have to feel bad about making it the best thing it could be, because it should. If it's not, I feel like you did it a disservice. So there is no one way to do it, but I do think that, there's obviously a general beginning, middle, end to a story, right? Endings are the ones that are the hardest in true crime, I would say. But, the ending that we all want is the guy in handcuffs, walks out, and everyone's clapping what Gilbert does. But, that's not always possible. But I write an arc of the true crime story I'm investigating after I've done it that I know is going to change. But I know that this is satisfying enough.
Mhm.
Like this feels like a resolution. And I think that matters, because the thing is, I can't arrest anybody. I could go with a box of the smoking gun, the fingerprints, the confession, and give it to the police, and I still can't make them do anything about it. So it isn't me who's going to make that difference. I can just bring a lot of attention to this story and maybe point out the things that went wrong, or point, the authorities or community, wherever, whoever, towards a direction that they may have not gone yet. And then that's when the things that are out of your control, the ending that every true crime documentary wants and every network wants you to have already figured out, if you're pitching something, that's how that can happen, is by telling the great story first, getting people interested, getting people talking, then leading you to places that, went beyond maybe where it got stalled out at one point.
This is so good. I'm taking notes. I'm recording.
too.
We were
Okay.
recording, you're just going to watch it back.
I'm gonna watch it back.
Only
screen.
Gilbert's parts.
Shut up. That's so funny. Gilbert, I do want to know, what do you have for advice, right? Like for someone starting out who wants to create a really profound, award-winning podcast, like what do you say to people that are like, I want to tell a powerful story?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing, sort of jumping off something that Payne said about ADHD brain, I have it too. I mean, it's just
What?
like, yeah, totally. I mean, I'm too old for this too, Payne. But I also recognize it's kind of a superpower when you're doing research like that's.
Oh
I
yeah,
just
yeah.
kinda
Sometimes
get
you're like,
obsessed
this
with
is,
this.
thank
Yeah.
God I have this. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, well, it's like the whole day I was on this dumb thing, and just but
Yeah, yeah.
I can tell you that stories about that stuff that like I don't know how normal people could deal with it, but like
Right.
going through high school yearbooks for decades, looking at all the pictures and the names and seeing connections,
That's
and
obnoxious. Yeah.
finally making a connection. Go, oh, these guys denied knowing each other, but here they are on the same baseball team, and
Yeah.
like stuff like that is really exciting to find out. But sometimes it's like such a small piece of your story, so you have to learn to see the bigger picture.
That's about 1 minute of your show, right?
Exactly.
What's the rest of it sound like? Yeah.
Exactly. So wow, I spent a lot of time on that 1 minute. But I think it comes from, like, I'll give you an example. Robert Caro, the great writer who's written about Lyndon Johnson, his biography, he's got like, I think 4 different volumes out. And his motto is turn every page. And
Yeah.
I really like that, because when you get a hold of files on cases, there's tons of stuff, and a lot of it doesn't look like it's going to be interesting. It doesn't, maybe it's just background stuff. And I always think of that, turn every page, because you never know. And I remember when I was working on my last book, I got sidelined into a big file that I kind of knew nothing was going to be there, but I had it in the back of my head, turn every page. And I went through, and I was looking through it, nothing was, and I saw this one report that was misfiled. It was supposed to be in the FBI files, and it got into a completely different agency. Shouldn't have been in there. And it was the smoking gun of the story. It was a witness who was there and saw the whole thing, and he turned informant and told the FBI everything. And I never would have found that unless I just went through some stupid file that was leading to nothing. And there it was, misfiled. So that whole adage about turning every page, I think it's really made a difference. If you become so familiar with everything in there, you may find something that shouldn't have been there and that might be key to your case. So get your hands on everything and go over it, and don't dismiss it just because it looks like it's not going to be interesting.
Oh, that's good advice. That's good. Oh, turn every page. Okay, Payne, what's your advice to someone looking to create?
I feel like I wouldn't have found that page that Gilbert found. I could have had the same book and be like, nothing in here. And, but I totally agree. You do got to turn every page, and you got to, and sometimes for me, that's one of the hardest parts. Like, I don't really look at myself or view myself as like a really good investigator, really. I think I have like good intuition and instincts. I think like where I suck and Gilbert's probably really good is going through these files and turning those literal pages. But in the same way, I think that you could make the same analogy with people and tape and that one thing that one guy said that one time, right? Like, why not just call that person he was talking about? Just let's just see, right? And so for me, a lot of it's been like, man, I almost didn't do that, and now that I did, we're way over here. But it might be because you're tired or whatever. So my analogy to Gilbert's, finding the smoking gun, which is like way, way cool. Like my comparison would be like, let me just call them, or let's just go to their house right now. Let me try that. Let me try them again. Like, let me call them a fourth time. Let me be annoying and then apologize about it. Right. Like, or whatever it is, depending on how important it is. Kind of having a little bit of this tenacity of like turning every stone, because it's exhausting, but you'd be surprised like at how forgiving most people are. If your intentions are what they should be, if they're pure, then most people can see that. You know, I if I called you 3 times and you're like, "Hello, who the hell is this?" If I politely like, "Hey, I know, I'm so sorry. This would probably be annoying, but I'm so and so and da 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 da." Okay, most good humans are like, okay, right? I would probably come around to that, and so I think to me it's like pushing a little further. Um, and I've learned that every time I've pushed further, nothing bad's really happened through that. Unless you're like, poking the bear of like a murderer in the same room with the gun, and he has the gun and you don't, which that's never happening usually here. It's like you're going to be okay. You're just scared about how someone's going to react when, you might be surprised that people are more accepting and more willing to talk than you think they are, even when they say that they're not. And now some people don't want to talk, and you'll find that out too. But I've had some people say that they would never talk to me, and then they're the ones calling me. Um, and it's just how it happens. So there's a little bit of patience there, and just kind of keeping at it, right? Not giving up, or finding different ways to connect. Like I've had people, give me hard no's, and then I sit down for like 30, 45 minutes and write out like a sincere message, and maybe I sent it to him on Facebook Messenger, and I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, blah 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 blah. This is my intention. I want this, and this is what the family's telling me. And most of the time they get back and they realize, okay, this isn't some scary gotcha thing, you know, it's okay, this isn't live, you're not in trouble, like you could actually help. And I someone might appreciate that. I think most good people are cool with that, but you gotta be able to push harder than you may be comfortable with at first,
Right.
and deal with what happens as a result of that, and get into damage control and make it better if you got it all goofed up, which is what I try to get better at.
I listen to your shows. I always listen to the interview, and then I say to myself, I wonder how many phone calls and how many text messages it took to get that person to say that little sliver of information, right? There's so much
Right.
work that goes on that the audience will never know about, or maybe they do. Sometimes you let them in on that.
Mm-hmm.
I really admire that about the work that you guys do. Do you have any details about upcoming projects that we can be aware of, like that you guys have going down? Gilbert?
Gilbert, I'm gonna go first.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on something with Payne said,
Yeah,
because I think
go.
it's really important.
Yeah,
Like you talking about me with the documents and you with the investigation, the tape. Like
yeah,
I think like that's a good message for people who are learning. Like I've never had a
yeah.
document slam a door in my face. You know what I mean? Like I stress out about that. I don't want to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
told like go away. I'm asking you about maybe the worst day of your life, and maybe they don't want to talk about it, and I can't get
yeah,
a hold of them, so I got to show up. And I do not like that feeling. It's a very
yeah,
confrontational thing, and I don't feel very good about it. So I think I'm one of those guys. You say you might not have found that document in that
yeah. I
file.
wouldn't have.
I might not have gone back a second time, maybe. And
Yeah. No, and I get it.
those
Yeah,
are
that's
your
why a team is
strengths.
important, though, I think, right? Because there's people on my team who aren't as good as you. Hopefully, they're not listening, but you're one of the goats at this, but that are better at finding those things. And
Yeah.
then there's me who might be a little bit more, have a little more tenacity, or just like, fuck it, I'm gonna go do it again. Like, whoa, why are you doing that? But then make it work out. Okay, take the story there, or go get your story. Don't wait for it to come to you. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, it is nerve-wracking. I think a lot of people get intimidated by that. Like, all right, I'm going to
Yeah.
visit this person and I gotta ask them about this, and why'd they want to talk to me? And you know what?
Yeah.
You said something else, Payne. And I a lot of times, like I've tried to reach out to certain people in that area because I'm avoiding the one central guy that I want.
Exactly.
But I'm
Just
like,
call who
that
you really
guy's
want to call. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm like, that guy's never going to talk to me. Why would he talk to me? It doesn't make any sense. Turns out like everybody else wouldn't talk to me, but this guy does. You never
It's the
know.
weirdest
I mean,
thing. I
just don't.
know.
I don't,
Once you
and you
learn
can't
that or
predict
see it
it.
happen, you're like, damn, what have I missed out on? Right.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
don't assume that they might be like, I've been waiting for this. And you're like, what? Like, you're just like, just because you're perceiving it one way does not mean that anyone else is perceiving it that way. That's just your own personal bias. It may be based on like the idea that you would be uncomfortable talking about this, or that it's an uncomfortable topic. But yeah, like, don't dance around what you're really trying to do. Like, yeah, you call this guy instead of going to what you really want, right?
Right.
Which is always the hardest one,
You guys would be such
It
a
always
good
is.
team. Like I propose a Gilbert King, Payne Lindsey like project together. Can that be the next podcast we work on?
Honestly,
But I love
I'd have fun. He was on my podcast like a few
Yeah,
months ago when I was in New York, and I had a blast then.
it was
you
fun.
guys are
Yeah, but I love the way that we both kind of think about this, and
yeah,
it's cool to know that there's, you know, coexisting styles of getting a similar product in a way, but different strengths and weaknesses, or tendencies or habits, and like then that's okay, right?
Yeah, totally
And
true. I mean, I could be
yeah,
the document guy, Payne, and I'll just get all the stuff together.
right,
And you go, here
right.
it is. You go
I'm
talk to
like,
those
you
read
people.
don't
that
need to
to
be
me.
calling
I'm too
people.
slow of a reader. Yeah.
I love it.
So you
I
guys,
love it.
there are so many beautiful questions in the Q&A
Let's do
section.
it.
Let's jump into the Q&A. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. We only have 10 more minutes. But before we leave today, I do want to know what's up next for the two of you. You're not going to get out of that question. So keep that in the back of
Oh
your
yeah,
head.
sure.
So anonymous
Um,
attendee, which I always love, anonymous attendee. This is a kind of
Oh,
a nuts and bolts question, and I think it's a good one. What tech do you use for your interviews? Because when people want to go out and do a podcast, they kind of feel a little paralyzed. Like, what do I use? Is this okay? What's everybody else using? So what are you guys using out there?
I mean, I'll start first on this one. So when I first started 2016, I was Googling like podcast kit, nothing. And I'm like, ugh, what? Like, I wanted it to be like packaged up for me and like ready to go and like look like
They
neat
didn't
and
have that on
cute.
Amazon? Damn it.
They didn't. Then I just learned like, oh, it's just like a microphone and something to record into. That's essentially it. And then a month ago, I was walking around Best Buy, and sure enough, I see like podcast starter kit, and I was like, that's what I wanted, you know. But I think that uh, I always try to preach like, don't get hung up on the equipment and stuff. Like a microphone's a microphone. There, I use like for my voiceover, either use the like the RE20 mic or a Shure MB, which is like kind of the same standard. They're like $300, and like for $300, you're gonna get the same kind of microphone. But I'll be honest, for the latest season of Up and Vanished season 4, we purposely recorded a lot of stuff on my iPhone, um, like other weird things, and then mix it with this. Like, so you get this sort of variation of tape that feels maybe not so sterile. I kind of started to feel like if it's too glossy, it becomes like it's unreal and not real. And so,
Mm.
equipment, don't trip on it. Just watch a couple YouTube videos and figure it out. But I don't think that makes a difference in a better product.
Yeah, and I can barely answer that question because Kelsey usually doesn't want me touching any of the equipment. I don't
She's
know
like, just don't
any of
touch
this
it.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, just stay away from it. But there's one thing that like a shotgun mic with a big furry thing on it that seems
It's
to
a good one.
people really like that thing and they pet it sometimes. They think it's a
Looks
cat or
cool
something
too.
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
It's called a dead cat, actually. Yeah. It
Is
actually
that what
is
it is? Okay.
called a dead cat. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my tech contribution to this conversation.
All right, great.
I
No,
love
that's
that.
helpful though. I love it. You either have, you have a $300 mic and you have an iPhone, and it can anything goes at this point. Just
I mean, the iPhone 15 has literally, I'm not kidding. We were talking this yesterday with my composer. Some of the best noise cancellation technology, I think, out there. And so, benefit being, I did like a secret undercover conversation with a suspect in this latest season, and we mic'd it from all different places. And the best recording we had was from the table from my iPhone because it was cutting out most of the bar noise. So
okay, no,
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
that's
really good.
crazy. I didn't know that.
Um,
That's amazing.
Alicia had another question in the chat. I think this is a really good one. For those of us that don't have a ton of access to money, right, to
yeah,
tell the stories, particular stories about missing Indigenous women in Canada, which I think is what she's interested in. Can Payne talk
yeah.
about, or Gilbert, if you have thoughts about this, about pitching before being sort of a recognizable podcaster? How do you tell stories when you're not someone that's already known in the industry? And how do you tell stories when you don't have a budget? Right? Like, I know
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, I guess it's like, what what do you need the money for? If you're traveling from like, Atlanta to Canada, yeah, that makes sense. That's going to be expensive, right? You're going to have to, put yourself up. You're going to have to like buy tickets. I think that there are affordable ways to get the equipment part done. Um, you don't have to start out by flying around the country and, doing some, highbrow documentary thing. Most of Up and Vanish season 1 was phone calls, even though it was in my home state. And they have a cool sound to them if you can get them recorded right. And I think it's kind of almost a podcasty sort of thing now, like hearing a phone call. So I think that you don't necessarily have to have a lot of money to start out to make a podcast, which is why I made one to begin with because I was broke and I bought the only mic I could afford at Best Buy at the time before they had the podcast kit. And I just started recording. The one benefit that I had was that I knew how to edit like video because I grew up doing that. And I actually edited the whole first season of the audio in a video editing program, Adobe Premiere, and not Audition because I refused to learn a new program. But yeah, I think that there's many ways to do it, and I think that you don't have to have all the glossy things starting out. And also, if you want some advice or help, feel free to DM me, or if there's other ways that like I could help with, like if it's like an MMIW story, I think that's what they said. Then just reach out and let me know, and because there's a lot of maybe ways of people I could connect you to that would be more beneficial to you than anyone else.
Amazing. Gilbert, some of my favorite moments were you and Kelsey, like in the car trying to, figure out what the heck you were doing with your audio. Those are some of my favorite moments where you're like, how do we do that? Like, I just love that sort of peeling back the layer.
Yeah, and that stuff, like this is one of the things that the producers told us, just keep the mics on all the time because you guys are
Oh, yeah.
clueless, and just let it run a whole time.
Well, you
And
Always
clearly
rolling.
weren't clueless. I mean, you were
Sure,
doing
but-
something so beautiful, but I hear you.
yeah, but like, we end up leaving in a lot of those moments where we're like stuck in traffic trying to figure things out. And I think it just adds to the humanity. And I just allow the producers to sort of come in and say, this is a really cool little moment because it shows your frustration.
Yeah.
They call it like Gilbert on the warpath, where I'm just kind of cursing under my breath, at the police station or at the clerk, all these guys, they have the files, they're not giving it to it, that kind of stuff, where I'm really doing that. Everything's real because I forget those things are on me. But
Yeah.
in terms of like, we tried something in the last episode that I thought really worked really well. Is Leo was leaving the prison and he was, with family in a Tesla, so it was a pretty tight car. We ended up putting like a lav mic on him and just documenting the whole day because he was
Good
mic'd
call.
the whole day. And there were just some beautiful, I never would have thought of that, but there were some beautiful moments where he goes into a Burger King for the first time and you can hear him. He's like, I'm
Oh.
scared to death in here. He just doesn't, and it was empty. He just was so overwhelmed by,
Yeah.
36 years in prison. His first time out to a bathroom, I didn't realize this, he hadn't seen himself in a mirror in 36 years. They don't have mirrors in prisons. They
That's
have like these
terrifying.
reflective hubcaps that you can
So
kind of
you're always
shade it.
warped.
And he said, yeah, and it's always like masks all the blemishes. You don't get a true picture. And when he walked into the bathroom at Burger King, he's like, I look so old. Like he'd never
That's
seen
scary,
himself
though.
that way. Little moments like that, and just like, and that was something we didn't do with like sort of like lavs the whole time. It just worked for this thing, and it turned into some really beautiful moments. And so that was something new to us. But so I think just being open-minded and trying, just realizing, like you said, Payne, there's no rules to this. It's just about seeing what you can come up with sometimes and
Yeah.
taking little chances with things. We didn't know if the lavs would work, but they worked perfectly.
They better be press record because you learned that one once.
Yes, you do.
Hopefully only once.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And
but
Right?
everyone gets one. It happens at least once, or the full delete of a session.
I wish
Right.
we could get more to more of these Q&A because you guys have such great questions, but I want to hit this one really quick. I think it's really helpful. When do you go from, hey, we're in the field, we're recording, we're in it, to let's start piecing something together? When do you make that decision to start producing what you're collecting, or is that different with everyone?
I feel like I have to have a certain amount of stuff to even tell a story. Sometimes I'll get impatient and, like at the beginning of the story, it's always the most frustrating because like you start with nothing. And so you're getting little pieces, and I might get one piece that sounds good. So what I do is like, I'll like play around with it. I'll like cut little things with it and put music to it and just kind of see like what it feels like. And they're not like real segments, but like they might become inspiration for something later. Then once I have sort of enough to sort of stitch together something and have a balance of different voices from angles of whatever, then I start being able to stitch them together. And I'll remember those moments where like, hey, that woman's voice sounded so good. in this one line she said that like no matter what the story's about, we have to include this line here because I think it's so powerful. And I'm going to make sure that gets in there organically somehow. So like it starts in the beginning, but it until I have like enough to like to see any sort of picture bigger than just what's in front of me, do I really get like to the nitty gritty of a podcast episode, I'd say.
Gilbert, quick thought on that.
And, my only thought is like, we didn't know what we needed. So we just
Yep.
had enough to fill like probably 3 podcasts. We had
Well,
like
give me
parallel
some.
narrative going. Yeah, exactly. We had like sort of a parallel narrative going, like we're investigating Leo Schofield in the 80s and then Jeremy Scott in the 80s. And we did that whole thing. And so it's almost like we had 2 podcasts. And so we had an overabundance of material, mainly because of COVID. When we were working on this, we couldn't stop. I actually rely on smarter people like our producers, our senior producers, and our sound editor to sort of listen to everything and bring some clarity to it, because sometimes I just have so much of it. Even with the outline that we kind of structure, it's like, nope, this tape is really good. This isn't really working. And so I really allow the producers to use their recollections and the way they feel, and just maybe their response to the tape. It might be something totally different. Like, this is really beautiful. I'm like, oh, I didn't really see that. I didn't think of that before, but okay.
No, that's really great advice, right? Always have other ears and eyes around you that are supporting you.
Definitely.
So turn the page, knock on the door. These are great pieces of advice that I'm getting from you guys. I thank you everyone for being here. I think we've gone over on time. I do want to know what you guys have going on next. Maybe you could do like, I don't know, do we have time, Michelle, for a quickie, or do we?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
can we look for next, Gilbert? Like, what can I listen to?
We are working on a season 2 of Bone Valley. That's sort of an offshoot from the original case, something that developed while we were working on this. And we're putting that together now. I can't really talk too specifically about it.
Tell us how it
'cause
ends.
Yeah, I'll tell you how it ends. That's always a good thing when you start these things. Yeah, I have no idea where it's
Right.
going to end, but we're doing it anyway.
Very
Right.
exciting. I can't wait. All right. And I can't wait to listen to that updated episode you told me about today. Okay, Payne, what about you? What can we look forward to?
I mean, the thing that is soonest is the next installment of Up and Vanished season 4. The first 8 episodes are out now. This season's going to be a lot different than the ones in the past. It's actually it's been planned this way, but it kind of organically developed like that in the narrative that you listen to. But it's 2 cases that we're investigating at one time in a tiny town, Nome, Alaska, 3,000 people, and they start kind of intersecting. So later this month, early July, there'll be another installment of this story, this season 4 of Up and Vanished, and a lot more focused on the second case, but going back to the first case, and now some of the same characters are weaving in and out, and it becomes this sort of like the lines are blurred because this town is so small, and you can really see what some of the real problems here are, I think.
Very cool. Well, thanks for having me. Talking to the 2 of you has been such a treat for me. I'm huge fans. And Michelle, thanks for having me moderate today.
Well, thanks for joining us. It was great to have you and Gilbert and Payne here, and we'll be looking forward to seeing everyone at the next deep dive on the Ambies with our conversation with Ronald Young Jr. on August 5th and plenty of things in between. Thanks,
Wait,
everyone.
real quick,
Yeah.
Gilbert, if we made a podcast together, what would we call it?
Ooh.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say that again, Payne.
If we made a podcast together, what do we
Oh.
call it? I know, I had to put you on the spot.
That is a
I
really
know.
hard. I'm terrible with titles, but I don't know. I'd go with whatever you came up with. I'm
How
terrible.
about Payne King? How about Payne King?
How about Payne Valley?
I like that one.
It rolls.
It's a
King
good
of Payne.
podcast. True crime.
I think it might be offensive, but it does roll if it's about something else.
That was
Yeah.
pretty good, Nikki. King of Pain. I like that
King of
one.
Pain.
Okay,
right?
now we're getting somewhere.
Right?
Okay.
King of Pain. All right. You're welcome. I'll just take a little EP.
Yeah,
credit.
we'll give you exactly. You get residuals.
I'd listen to King of Pain, I have to say.
I would turn that off immediately. I'd be like,
Now we got to make it happen, Pain.
Yeah.
all right, let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. I'm willing it into existence here.
Oh my God.
Cool. Just find a nice, good
Fantastic.
Marblehead mystery.
Honestly,
Perfect.
there are some. Yeah. Of course, I had to check. But I was like, I don't want to do that in my hometown. They're not going to like me here if I do
Yeah, you have to move.
that. Somebody kill someone here. I'll just let them. I'll do that right before I move.
All right, everyone, have a great day.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.